It's September 24th, and we're 40 days away from the election. You're not going away for the election, are you? Ugh, fine. Be that way. But stay tuned. Today is Absentee Ballot Day on Vote for America. And we're talking with former United States Treasurer Rosario Marin, former Homeland Security Chief of Staff Miles Taylor, and a woman who can tell you how to make sure your absentee ballot is counted. And now, a co-founder of the Lincoln Project and host of Vote for America, Jennifer Horn.
And welcome to Vote for America. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are live on Twitter and Facebook and another one live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And we hope that you're going to join us in this conversation. You can make your voice heard on social media using the hashtag Vote for America. We're so happy to have you with us today, where we are folks from across the country are coming together to make sure that their voices are heard. We're going to spend time with you every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Make sure that you have the data you need to make informed decisions, that you have the tools you need to make sure that your vote is cast and counted, and maybe sometimes also talk about some of the language and the strategies that we can use to encourage and persuade other people to join this very important mission that we're on. And that is, of course, to make sure that we defeat Donald Trump and that Joe Biden becomes the next great president of the United States. I'm so happy to welcome today my co-host, Lisa Senecal. She's a lifelong independent. She's a woman's advocate and the co-founder of the Marin Group, Lisa Senecal. Hey, good afternoon, Lisa. Great to have you here.
Hi, Jennifer. It's really great to be here. I am excited to be part of this program. I think it's an incredibly important conversation that we're having here 3 days a week, and that we're trying to keep it a focused conversation. One of the things that we know is a tactic of Donald Trump is to keep tossing out shiny objects for us to look at and try to shift the conversation away from the many ways that he has failed the American people. We had one of those last night when he said from the podium that maybe he's not going to respect the outcome of the election, and we just need to set that stuff aside. That's not the important stuff. We need to focus on voting, getting out to vote, taking people with us to vote, and making sure, as you said, we make him a one-term president.
Yeah, you're right. Donald Trump is brilliant at distraction, isn't he? Kind of chaos and distraction. And he says these things that are outrageous that he knows will get everybody all riled up because, of course, it's a very serious thing if you have a president of the United States who will not accept the outcome of a free and fair election. But there's only one person out there out of 350 million Americans. There's only one person out there who is saying, we'll wait and see. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. And it's Donald Trump. So to your point, if we are talking about this, if we are allowing him to drag us into this, this crazy conversation about whether or not somebody who loses an election will actually, have to walk away from the office, then we're not talking about the things that are so important. We're not talking about his mismanagement, his gross mismanagement of the coronavirus. We're not talking about 200,000 American lives lost. We're not talking about a president who thinks that our military volunteers are suckers and losers and idiots. And, there is so much happening in the world right now that's really important. We've got to keep our eye on the ball and make sure that we don't allow Donald Trump to pull us down the path he would like us to go down and get our eyes off of what's really important out there right now. One
Absolutely.
of which, yeah, and I think you'd agree, Lisa, we're about 6 weeks out. Voting, the most important thing right now is for people to be thinking about voting and make sure they have a plan to vote. How, where, when. Make sure that your vote is cast and counted. And so today at Vote for America, we're going to talk about absentee ballot voting. And I say all the time, that every day is about voting at the Lincoln Project. And today we're going to talk about absentee ballot or voting by mail. And you'll hear it referred to as both of these things. And you will hear frequently from this president that it is the idea of absentee ballot voting that is going to delegitimize the outcome of the election, that somehow it is rife with fraud, rife with abuse. And we know that that is not true. When it comes to absentee ballot voting and the votes being counted and accurate, what we know about them is that just about 0.0025% level of fraud in absentee ballot voting. That's extraordinary. We're also going to talk a little bit in a few minutes, Lisa, about naked ballots, because We like to have fun here at Vote for America. And if there are naked ballots out there, I think we should talk about it. But what do you have
Oh,
for us on that
absolutely.
first?
Well, there's nothing sexier than voting, so we should absolutely be talking
That's
about
right.
naked ballots today. Um, there are some really critical things when we're talking about absentee ballots that we need to make sure people are remembering to do. So we want to go ahead and call out three of those. Um, you need to request your absentee ballot and get that done now. In some states, those ballots are already going out. There are a few states that are sending them out without having to request them, but check with your state. If you need to make a request for it, do it now. Read the instructions when you get that ballot in your hand. There are a lot of steps to go through to make sure that your ballot is filled out properly, mailed back in properly, and we've got to make sure that that is done to the T because you want your vote to count. And the third is to mail your ballot back early. We know there have been issues with the Postal Service. There are going to be a lot of absentee mail-in ballots going in this year and a lot more to be counted because of COVID-19. A lot of people are choosing to vote that way. So get your ballot back in early and absolutely be certain that your vote is going to be counted. And if you have any questions about who we might recommend that you cast that vote for, it's got to be Joe Biden. This is just such a critically important election. Trump's going to do everything he can to distract us from the really important stuff. But, the hashtag is Vote for America because that's what a vote for Joe Biden
Right.
really is. And that's what we need to be doing.
You're right, Lisa. And I say that as a lifelong Republican because I have come to the clear understanding a long time ago that the choice is Trump or America. We can't have both. And so I am a lifelong Republican who's going to be voting for Joe Biden this year. And I encourage folks, if you're looking for information about when, where, how to vote, where you live right now, go to lincolnproject.us/vote. All the information that you need is right there, and you can find it state by state by state, which is so important. But talking about absentee ballots again, let's kind of start with the obvious. We've had an absentee ballot and mail vote system in place in our country for decades. And the truth is, the absentee ballot voting system goes back to the Civil War. It is how our deployed military have always voted and have always had their votes counted. And so, I'm always a little offended when this president tries to undermine the credibility of it, because if you care so much about that, then why aren't you addressing it for the military? Because he knows it's not really an issue. That's why. So it's important that you follow all the rules when you vote by absentee ballot. And it is a little bit more complicated than walking into a polling place and checking the box, on the piece of paper that they give you. So we want to make sure that you have all the information that you need today. Your absentee ballot is going to come in the mail. They're going to be two. And here's where we get to talk about naked ballots, by the way, Lisa. I know you've been anticipating this. A naked ballot is an absentee ballot that gets returned without the appropriate envelopes. So when your ballot comes in the mail, it's going to have two envelopes in there. There's also going to be a list of instructions. Read through the instructions carefully before you start, and then just execute them one at a time, just like you would anything else that you do that involves instructions. But there are going to be two envelopes in there for your absentee ballot. The ballot goes into the first envelope. That's what makes it not naked now that you have dressed it in that envelope. And that's the envelope that makes your vote confidential, because that envelope does not get opened by the town hall or the first person who gets it in their hand when you send it in. And then you take that envelope and you put it in the second envelope, and you make sure that that is the one that is sealed and stamped and gets dropped into the mail. It's just so important, especially if, for example, you're in a state like Pennsylvania, where there were some court cases trying to challenge whether or not an absentee ballot that's missing that inside envelope, whether or not it could be counted. And the court said no, that it cannot be counted. There will be no naked ballots counted in Pennsylvania, especially. So the ballot goes into the first envelope goes into the second envelope, and then you put your stamp on it and make sure it goes out in the mail. All votes must be properly clothed. I think that's the message today, isn't
That's
it,
right.
Lisa?
Yep, we're moving into cooler weather, and you just want to make sure that you're dressing your ballot in layers.
Exactly.
And we're not in a
Exactly.
single layer time of year anymore. It's got to be 2 layers to make that vote count.
Well, and you know what? It's just like anything else. You know, the devil's in the details. You got to get it right. You got to do it right up front. And the truth is that hundreds of thousands of ballots are rejected for technical reasons. You know, every year, just
Right.
over 550,000 absentee ballots were rejected during the primaries, not because the person wasn't a legitimate voter, for technical reasons. Read the instructions, check them off as you go. 2 envelopes. Get it done right, get it in the mail. That is the most important thing.
Yep. So
Oh,
let's
so
go
we're,
through those reminders one
yeah.
more time. I want to make sure everybody is taking the steps that they need to make sure that they are going to have a ballot and they're going to get that ballot back in on time. So the 3 things you need to be doing right now: request your ballot, and you can go to lincolnproject.us/vote and click on how to vote and vote by mail, and everything you need is going to be right there. Read the instructions, as Jennifer was explaining. Super important to make sure you do this right, and then get your ballot mailed in. Get it in mailed really early, just as quickly as you can turn it around after you've received it in the mail. Get it sent back in so you can make sure your vote is counted.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lisa. Now we're going to go to our first guest, a woman I got to tell you, I have a tremendous amount of admiration for. It's been an honor, you know, just having the opportunity to get to know her a little bit over these last few weeks at the Lincoln Project. You know, in politics, we're broken down into demographics. It's kind of just the way it is. You know, how many votes you're going to get from this group of people, how many votes from this group of people, and we know that in this election in particular, that women, suburban women, are an incredibly important demographic. We've talked about that here before, but there's also a really important group of folks out there whose votes have the potential to truly swing the outcome of this election as well, and that's the Hispanic vote. At the Lincoln Project, we just announced our Hispanic Steering Committee, and includes, you know, current and former Republican leaders who are going to lead voter registration efforts and turn out the vote efforts in key areas of our various battleground states. And our next guest is part of that. Rosario Marin, she's also the former United States Treasurer. She served under President George W. Bush. We're really just so pleased to have her with us here today, Rosario Marin. Good afternoon, Rosario. How are you? I think that maybe Rosario is having trouble hearing us, and I'm going to wait for our super genius folks behind the scenes here to give me the signal that she's with us again. Rosario, how are you? So this is so important, Lisa, you know, as we're talking about all of it looks like we're having some technical difficulties here today. And I'll just remind you this, and this is live stream on YouTube. This is real life. This is how it goes. And you know, we're not sitting in a TV studio with a crew and all like right behind us. Everybody's working from their own spaces across the country. So, but Lisa, you know, this is
Yep.
such an important thing, I think, for people to understand. We're promoting this, you know, how important it is for people to get out and cast their ballot and make their voices heard. But when it comes to this, I just almost said strategery because I was just talking about President Bush. When it comes to talking about the strategy of politics, it is a question of breaking people down into these demographics, whether it has to do, you know, with their, you know, like Hispanic voters versus African American voters versus suburban women voters, or you know, issue voting. You know, this is how you win, and this is what you know we're working on at the Lincoln Project right now, Lisa, is making sure that we bring all of these people with a common interest together on election day.
Right, and I think it's easy to make the mistake if you're not used to getting down into the weeds of who voters are, to think that all of these groups are homogenous. That when we talk about
Right.
the Black vote or we talk about the Latinx vote, this is an incredibly diverse population, and the different messages that are going to resonate with different folks. It's really important that those are being tailored. So we are
Right.
we are
And
making sure we're hitting points that are going to resonate and have people join what we're trying so
Exactly.
hard to accomplish.
And it's kind of, the strategic part of politics. Voters tend to mostly see the face of the candidate or the face of the surrogates, the
Right.
messaging, the commercials, all of that sort of thing. And what's really important, I think, for us to understand in this election is that one thing that Donald Trump's campaign was very good at in 2016 was getting out there with messages that spoke to very specific groups of people. And you and I have talked about this before, even off the air, Lisa, that, for example, Donald Trump's, the way that he messages and the way that he targets, he somehow, over the last 4 years, it has suddenly become okay to be bigoted or to
Right.
be aggressively angry with people in your community, or to try incite violence, to you know all of these sort of different things that in the past we always said, hey, that's not who we are, let's find a better way to communicate. And I think that's
Right.
kind of part of this whole thing with when we're talking about breaking down our voters, who's going to get our message, and you know, is it me, or has Donald Trump just made it okay to be a bad person again? I don't
Yeah,
understand that.
he really has. And when we talk about breaking voters down into different segments so that we are speaking directly to people, we're talking about finding messages that will bring people together. And what Donald Trump's strategery has been
Yes.
for since he
Yeah.
started running in 2015, is
Yeah.
to pit us against one another. And
Exactly.
one of the things I appreciate so much about Joe Biden is that, and Kamala Harris, it's a unifying message. It's a unifying ticket. We have for the first time the first African American woman, first Asian American woman to be on a major
Right.
party ticket. And
Right.
so, we're looking at a ticket that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have that so much more represents what our country looks like, and it's so important that we have those voices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. The one thing that Donald Trump might actually be able to take credit for is that he appears to be uniting the country against him. And maybe
Right,
that's the
right.
good news for today. That's what we should focus on. Absolutely. So we're having technical difficulties here today, folks, and we're going to keep rolling along. We're sorry that we weren't able to connect to Rosario. We'll definitely get back to her today or on another show. But we're going to move ahead to our next guest today, who is particularly interesting, frankly. He's kind of the center of some really current news and what's right on the cusp of what's happening in this election right now. I'm really pleased. I'm sure that you have heard about him already if you're following politics. Miles Taylor is the former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security under Donald Trump. He left the Trump administration because of what he saw behind the scenes, because of what he saw with his own eyes firsthand, and he has become a pretty outspoken advocate against reelecting the president under whom he served. So we're really happy to welcome to Vote for America today, Miles Taylor. Hey, Miles, how are you?
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Doing well.
I'm glad to hear it. We're really glad that you made time for us today. We appreciate it also. Our audience here are an awful lot of Republicans who share our concerns about this president, and are looking for as much information as they can about him, trying to make good decisions here. And we'll just kind of jump right in because something happened yesterday that I think really disturbed people across the country, across the political spectrum. And I saw that you were kind of talking about it on social media as well yesterday when the president of the United States was asked directly, would he accept the outcome of this election? Good, bad, or indifferent, will you accept the outcome? And he said, well, we'll see. We'll wait and see about that. And then Mitch McConnell this morning, just to kind of set this up, put out a tweet. I assume speaking for himself and the majority, the Republican Senate majority, saying that the election will take place and whoever wins will be inaugurated on January 20th of 2021. My issue with Mitch's tweet to his response to the president is that he didn't respond to the president. He didn't address the president. He didn't tag the president. He didn't even address the fact that the problem is that it's a president who is making this ridiculous claim to begin with. He just kind of threw this statement out there talking about 1792. What's your response, Miles, when you hear what Donald Trump said yesterday, and
Well,
what
first,
you hear from Mitch McConnell today?
yeah, let me start with Mitch. It's not enough. The Senate Majority Leader and other elected Republicans are really the only ones that can hold Donald Trump accountable right now until the voters have the chance to hold him to ultimate account on November 3rd. It's really, really important that people within the party try to clamp down on this loose talk that the president has about the integrity of the vote and whether he's going to give up office. They've got to clamp down on it and say, we in his own party find it unacceptable. And the president must support the integrity of the vote. He must accept the results of the election. And if they're unfavorable towards him, he must transfer power to his successor. Those should be very basic things for anyone in American politics to submit to. But right now, we're seeing that folks are reluctant to do that. And I think that's a signal of how much of a vice grip Donald Trump has on the Republican Party right now. And I think that's alarming. And I say this as a Republican. I say this as someone who came up and spent my whole career as a Republican in the party, as someone who came into the Trump administration wanting the president to succeed, wanting him to succeed enough that he would earn a second term. But it wasn't that way. That's not what I witnessed. And as far as Trump's comments in particular, I think it's very, very alarming. That's an understatement. We've never seen anything like this in American politics. And that's hard for people to hear because there's so much hyperbole. I mean, we've both fallen victim to it. We've both fallen victim to just
Right.
so overstating the drama of what we're experiencing in Washington that people start to tune it out. But really, on this issue, um, we've never seen a president try to abdicate his responsibility to peacefully transfer power and to deflect. And I was part of a previous presidential transition in the George W. Bush administration. And do you know what we did? Not only did George W. Bush plan to hand over power either to John McCain or Barack Obama, but we spent time preparing so that no matter which person got it, they would be ready to do the job and not just do the job, but to do it
Right.
well. We prepared memos and transition plans and briefings, and you do that in good faith. My worry is the president is absolutely not doing this in good faith and is doing this with an eye towards potentially nefarious meddling in the election and the post-election outcome.
Well, and I'm glad you said that because that kind of goes to the heart of what the real concern is about all of this, right? To some degree here at Vote for America, we want folks to focus on election day. Don't let the president drag you off of message or drag you off to worrying about things that get in the way of you getting out there and getting your vote cast. But there are serious, when you talk about foreign meddling in the elections, and there are serious repercussions that come with a president who is this irresponsible with what he says and how he says it. But I wonder if he's not being irresponsible, if in fact he's being very intentional, very strategic, sending messages to people other than just people who are, the voters in America, undermining the credibility so that leads to a benefit to a country other than our country. You served in Homeland Security. Do you worry about things like the president, like these kinds of comments inciting violence? What kind, do you worry about what the consequences can be on the other side of the election when his supporters and other forces around the country hear him talking this way?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, a few years ago, we already started to have these concerns. So I came in with John Kelly as his national security advisor at DHS. And then I went on to serve as chief of staff of the department, the third largest in the federal government, and ran DHS for Kirstjen Nielsen. And we were responsible for protecting America's elections, right? That was one of our responsibilities as a department and a statutory obligation that we had. And I'll tell you, in the lead up to the midterm elections in 2018, we got a little bit of a taste of this. And I
Mm,
remember we briefed the president on the threats to that election. And we briefed to him that for the first time, we were seeing the Chinese starting to get involved in meddling in our internal political affairs with regard to the election, first time in a while, and that the Russians were back, and they were back and probably supporting Trump again, while the Chinese were potentially trying to oppose some of his policies. That was all made public by the director of national intelligence at the time, what was concerning to us is that after being briefed on this and urged to come out strong against these foreign governments that were trying to sow discord in our democracy, the president came out that month and he only called out one of them. He called out the Chinese, and he said
China.
nothing about the Russians. Why did he do that? He did that because the Russians were trying to help him and the Chinese were trying to hurt him. And that's not what he should have done. In fact, his national security cabinet, those household names that you know, were in a near panic that the president was refusing to call out all the bad guys trying to interfere in US affairs, and not just the bad guys that were trying to hurt him. We didn't get him to change his position, but it was definitely very foreboding. And we worried that in the 2020 election, if this happened again, that the president not only would ignore Russian intervention in our country, that he may well welcome it. Those prophecies have now essentially become self-fulfilling prophecies, because here we have the president who's learned previously that there's very few consequences for him accepting Russian assistance. Now he's amplifying their propaganda. We've literally seen the president of the United States amplifying foreign propaganda meant to undermine our electoral process and divide Americans. And he's continuing to welcome it. And his lieutenants, what's even more worrisome is his lieutenants are taking the cue. Now, look, in the first year or two of the Trump administration, the so-called axis of adults that was in there would never have done this, never had done this. And in fact, in the lead up to the 2018 midterm elections, Kirstjen Nielsen, when she was secretary, went out there and forcefully dressed down the Russians and said, don't you dare meddle in our elections. But Vladimir Putin doesn't care what the Secretary of Homeland Security has to say. He cares what the President of the United States has to say. So we need the president's lieutenants also to step up. We talked about Mitch McConnell and the elected Republicans, but the people in the president's cabinet need to hold him accountable on a peaceful transfer of power, but in the more immediate term, hold him accountable on pushing back against people who are trying to interfere in our sacred democratic process.
Yeah, it's not only our adversaries who I worry about when Trump comes out and says the stuff that he did yesterday. It's those fledgling democracies around the world who used to be able to look at the United States as an example of how a democracy does function well and what a peaceful transfer of power looks like. And we're now showing uncertainty in the way our democracy functions. And I don't have to tell you what's been happening in Belarus, where we need to be that shining city. We have to be a beacon of hope for people around the world in how a democracy can function. And we've really abdicated that position when we have a president who's saying the things that he does. Miles, one of the things that I have, one of the things that I have found interesting that Trump's now added to his stump speech is talking about reinstating a patriotic education in our schools. Mm-hmm. And there's such a conflict between patriotic education and a president who is saying he might not take part in a peaceful transition of power, because I remember when I was in school, one of the things that I learned was so important about the United States was that we had elections every 4 years, and if the party in power didn't win the re-election, that transfer of power would happen. How do you think we begin, not only in our children, but in ourselves and people around the world, how do we begin after the Trump presidency to reinstill people's confidence in what our democracy is supposed to be?
Well, I actually think, and maybe I'm an optimist, and people keep accusing me of being Mr. Brightside, but I actually think that restoring civic education in this country really starts with restoring civic discourse and civil discourse. And that's not going to be as hard as we think it is. I mean, we are all so hopelessly divided right now. It's difficult to see the other side of this thing where we come back together. But hear me out on this. I'm going to paint a really simple and hopefully boring picture. Donald Trump loses the election. That's the exciting part. He loses. Joe Biden comes into office. Joe Biden wakes up every day. He decides not to angry tweet. He decides to just go down to the office and do his work. Maybe the White House puts out a few press releases. Maybe Vice President Harris does an event with school children. And every now and again, maybe once a quarter, President Biden decides to do an address from the Oval Office where he says things that by and large Americans agree with and they generally like. That's my story. Just that
That's,
happening is enough, I think, to
yeah.
start restoring civil discourse in this country. Just getting the president out of our every single day lives will help restore civil discourse in this country and will feed into what you're talking about is a restoration of civic education and us actually having the time and the headspace to go back and talk about those first principles. Now, look, I think, again, that's a pretty low bar. There's a lot more we can do in this space, but it says a lot about the damage Donald Trump has done. It also says to me, as a conservative, that Donald Trump really isn't a conservative, right? Republicans believe in very small government, government that's
Yes.
not in your life every single day. Donald Trump has been in
Right.
our lives every single day of his presidency, and not just in our lives, but in our faces. That's not small government. That's government that's so obtrusive into your personal life that it starts to have repercussions. And the trickle down effect of the Donald Trump presidency has wreaked havoc, not just on our democratic institutions, but our economy and fundamentally the fabric of our republic and our society. Because every single one of us on this call and every single listener and viewer today has had the experience, the unrepeatable experience of having a friendship or a family member connection or an acquaintance or a business relationship affected by the President of the United States. Ask yourself this: is there any other period where really the President of the United States was personally affecting your relationships? Shouldn't that be a red flag? At a minimum, that's something to take to your therapist. But as a country, we're all sitting on the therapist couch right now and saying, we got a problem. And I think we know what the solution is.
Yeah, I kind of love your reference there, to be honest with you, talking about conservatives. And, there are still a certain group of Republican voters out there who are unsure about how they're going to vote on election day, Miles. And I think this goes to the heart of what is frequently a concern for conservatives and for Republicans. So let's wrap things up with this last question. From your position in Homeland Security, you speak from a position of authority and understanding and information, uh, and having worked right there with the president. What's the worst thing? What is the worst outcome of another 4 years of Donald Trump? Realistically, not like some crazy, conspiracy thing, but in real life, what's the worst possible consequence of Donald Trump winning 4 more years?
I think the worst consequence is that he ends up doing what he wants on foreign and defense policy. And here's what I mean by that. The first few years of the Trump administration, the president's impulse was to pull America back from everywhere it was in the world and to embrace our adversaries. And he did that in part. I mean, Donald Trump has really alienated all of our friends around the world. And he has a close and dear affinity for our adversaries. You just saw him the other day say,
Right.
isn't it not a bad thing if I'm friends with Putin? I don't know. Putin's the guy who's literally actively trying to take
Right.
your citizens and divide them. It's pretty bad that you want to be friends with him. So, what I worry is that Donald Trump will pursue those impulses, but this time unimpeded. In the first year or two of the administration, he wanted to pull us out of NATO, pull us out of key defense agreements around the world. He wanted to alienate key allies, cut off key agreements, things that ultimately will put Americans in danger if they happen. I mean, look, I don't want, as a conservative, I don't want the U.S. military deployed all over the globe in places where it doesn't need to be. But we do have troops in places where they fight forward so that we don't have to fight bad guys here on our city streets. The things Donald Trump wants to do in foreign policy would quite literally put us at greater risk of confronting our adversaries on our city streets or on our networks, whether it's cyber attacks or in-person, physical attacks. It will put the nation under greater threat. That's actually what worries me. That's not an overstatement. That's not hyperbole.
Right.
Most of us felt that way when we looked at Trump administration policies that he wanted to implement, and in a second term, he may do exactly that.
Miles, thank you so much for that. It is great for us to have people like you who have the kind of experience and background and firsthand knowledge of the issues and the president himself to come forward. So we're really, really grateful that you're here. Please continue to speak out America needs to hear your voice. Americans need to hear what it is that you know as we get closer and closer to Election Day. Thank you so much for joining us. It has really been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miles. And we are going to be back in just a few moments with some more Vote for America. You can join us in this conversation at hashtag Vote for America. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And we're going to be back with more in just a few minutes.
It's just so sad. Just watching the Republican convention, and they're spewing this fear. Donald Trump and all of them talking about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. All you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back. Like, I should just be a coach. And it's so often reminded of my color. We got to do better, but we got to demand better. We protest and they send riot guards, right? We're trying to get them to protect us, just like they protect everybody else. You don't need to be black to be outraged. You need to be American and outraged. And how dare the Republicans talk about fear? We're the ones having to talk to every black child. What white father has to give his son a talk about being careful if you get pulled over? All we're asking is you live up to the Constitution. That's all we're asking for everybody, for everyone. Thank you.
We'll march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today.
John Lewis. He was jailed and beaten, but never bowed. The son of sharecroppers, he was one of the first freedom riders. Attacked by a mob and left for dead in a bus station in Montgomery, Alabama, he got back up and led the fight for justice. That was John Lewis. He always got back up and never quit. Surrounded and assaulted by hate, he rejected violence and embraced love. For over half a century, he showed us the true meaning of courage and dignity. Today, America is in another crisis, and a new wave of hate is once again embraced by the powerful to hold on to their power. In the days ahead, let us be guided by the courage of John Lewis. He never quit. He always got up. He knew a better day belonged to those who had the courage to act. Now it's our turn.
We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
And welcome back to Vote for America. We hope that you will join us and make your voice heard as we go through the show using the hashtag Vote for America on all of your social media platforms. This show is about you. We want to make sure that your voice is heard, that your questions are answered, that you have what you need to be an effective voter on Election Day this year. And Lisa, real quick before we get to our next guest, I just want to say very quickly, I love those two commercials that we just ran because they really speak to the heart of the moment that we are living in right now. Whether it's the news from Breonna Taylor, the unrest in the streets, the civil unrest that this president has incited and really sown in so many ways. I think those commercials speak to the heart of who America really is, and I find it encouraging when I watch them.
Yeah, I do too. I think Miles made the very good point that we're not that far away from being able to return to that
Right,
again,
right.
and we can be there. We can be there by the end of January. We can start repairing the damage.
We can have a president who brings out the best in us and not the worst in us. And I'm really pleased to welcome our next guest. Kind of use that as a segue in. We had a little bit of difficulty at the beginning of the show getting connected, but we're happy she was able to make it some extra time and stay with us because our next guest is an incredibly powerful, impactful, bright, persuasive woman. She served in the administration of President George W. Bush. She was the United States Treasurer. She's also very involved with us here at the Lincoln Project, where we just rolled out our Hispanic Steering Committee because we know that on Election Day, and especially in some of these key swing states, certain areas within some of these key swing states, the Hispanic vote, the Latino vote is going to be extremely important if we're going to defeat Trump and bring in Joe Biden. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome Rosario Marin. Hey, Rosario, good afternoon.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Let's vote for America.
Yeah, exactly. Let's vote for America. And I'm sorry, I just spoke to a former U.S. Treasurer by saying, "Hey." I apologize. I'm very happy to have you here today. And let's kind of jump right into it, Rosario, and talk about the Hispanic vote in America. Especially, we have these key areas, Florida, for example. If if Joe Biden wins Florida, he's 99% likely to win the presidency. It's that important. Talk to me a little bit about the Hispanic vote because it's not just one lump, homogenous group of people, right?
Exactly, Jennifer. When people talk about Hispanics, they just put us all in one whole group. And the reality is, even within Florida, yes, you have a very significant and important group of Cuban Americans. Uh, but now you have a significant influx of people from Puerto Rico who obviously came from the island because of the failed leadership of this president.
Right.
And so there has been a significant growth, but we have Nicaraguans, we have certainly Mexicans, we have Venezuelans. And so those are very different groups of people that have, while we're aiming all of us to be Americans, our backgrounds dictate both the outreach, the way we talk to them, what's important to them or to us, including me as a Mexican, that it's different. And the approach is different because the needs are different. The desires, while we all attempt to be intent and want to be Americans, the reality is the way we talk is different. So I think it's very important, and they are going to make a difference, not just in Florida, but in North
Right.
Carolina. A significant number of Latinos live in North Carolina, but Latinos, Hispanics are everywhere, in Wisconsin,
Right.
in Iowa. So I think the Lincoln Project is doing a great job in targeting those areas where Hispanics, in fact, will make a difference.
And of course, in Arizona as well, which we know is a state where the Lincoln Project is very busy and has been very effective, excuse me, in the last couple of months. So talk to me a little bit about those differences, Rosario. You said different, different groups of Hispanics from different parts of the world, and they have different concerns, different challenges, different issues, perhaps that move them on election day. Tell me a little bit more about those differences. What are those issues and those concerns for different groups that it will be impactful on them as they're deciding who and how to vote?
So many of us have come to the United States basically for the same reason, right? We want a better life. I came from Mexico when I was 14 years of age because the economic reality of my family dictated that we would emigrate. Other people have been persecuted. Venezuelans, as you very well know, with that
Yeah,
dictator
right.
Maduro, it's very interesting how when we talk to Venezuelans, many of them see many similarities with what this president of the United States is doing and the places where they came from. Even Cubans understand that some of the things that Fidel Castro was doing are very similar to what this president is doing. And while we came for different reasons, Nicaraguans, the Salvadorians people, they were fleeing persecution. And yet we have this president that is persecuting us as a group of Latinos. He's insulting immigrants. He has stopped the asylum. It's just so these are the needs that people have, and their families and the voters. Of course, people from Puerto Rico, they're Americans and
Right.
they're very active in Puerto Rico. But when they get here, they need to register here in the United States and
Right.
then they need to vote. They're very active in Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans as a group are very involved in politics. But we need to literally take them by the hand. Not that they're here, they're US citizens. They need to register to vote, and obviously they need to vote. And I would certainly suggest, and as you guys are suggesting, they need to vote as soon as they can. There are many states that are opening their doors to drop in the ballots much earlier. So vote early, and if you can, please vote on election day. Make sure that your vote counts. Now, what are we
I
voting
love
for?
that. Oh, go right
The
ahead.
thing is,
What are we voting
what
for?
are we
Right.
voting for? What are we voting? We're voting for equality. We're voting for justice. We're voting, yes, we talk about the future of our country.
Right.
We're
Right.
voting for something even more simple than that. We're voting for respect. We're voting for dignity. We're voting for truth. That's what we're voting for. If we don't even have that, Jennifer, how can we talk about a future? How can we talk about a future where America is respected when this president doesn't even respect the people living within America?
You said, Rosario, you just said two things and that I think are so important to kind of, highlight and go back to. A minute ago, you talked about this, compared this president to Castro. And it's one thing, like if somebody from the other party comes out and says, "Oh, you're like this dictator, you're like that dictator," but for someone like you, with your background, with your experience, with the people that that you interact with on a regular basis, when you say that Donald Trump is like Castro, that carries extraordinary weight. You know what you're talking about. And then just now, when I hear you talk about what are Latinos voting for, they're voting for dignity and respect and equality, just to be treated with some basic humanity. There are so many groups of people in our country who have suffered the indignity of this president, whether it's women, whether it's the disabled, whether it's the military, and in a very real way, Hispanic voters. I would say that the president built his 2016 race on racism targeted at Hispanic voters across the country.
Yes.
I mean, I just go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was one of the very, very initial things that was glaring to me. How can somebody run for president, putting down an entire community? Making them a
Exactly.
scapegoat for all the ills of our country. It is just so wrong to emphasize, to finger point at immigrants who, like me, are coming here to give, to produce, to share, whatever it is that we have come up with, our brains, our backs, our desire to succeed. Uh, and this president makes a mockery of all of that. He calls us rapists and criminals when all we want to do is contribute. And so that was the beginning. Then we had 4 years. Look what he has done, separating families, having a cabinet meeting where every cabinet member raises their hand and says, yes, it's okay to separate families. How can we allow that? Where's our moral conscience Where is our moral compass? We have lost that. And it is this president. How we may be pro-life as Republicans, but what is pro-life about ripping babies from their lactating mothers? What is being pro-life when you don't care about 200,000 dead Americans? What is pro-life if you don't care about separating all these families? There is something wrong with that. And that's why we need to vote for dignity and respect for ourselves, for our families, for our community, for America.
Rosario, thank you so much. You kind of choked me up a little bit. I share your passion for the issues, and I'm just so grateful that you are here to give voice to it. I hope that all of our friends out there who are, members of different Latino communities across the country are listening today, and so they are so important. Every single voice in this election matters. We can't have, nobody can stay home. Nobody can let this one slide. So I'm grateful for you being here with us today, Rosario Marin, former U.S. Treasurer under President George W. Bush. Thank you so much. Have a terrific afternoon.
Thank you, Jennifer. We'll see you.
Thank you. Thank you. So Lisa, she got me on that one. I have to tell you, as she so much passion behind what she was saying, and through the 2016 election, every time Trump made another assault on another group of people, another individual, like it gets to you, and you almost become numb to it. And then you sit there and you listen to Rosario, a strong Hispanic woman, a strong leader in her community, and just the degree to which she is moved by it all, it really moved me.
Yeah, I had the same reaction listening to her speak, and one of the deeply offensive things that I think the president has done recently is when, after ignoring Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans and the
Right.
devastation that they experienced from the hurricane, nothing was done for years to help
Right.
the Puerto Rican people get back on their feet. And now that Donald Trump wants their votes, he is out there offering billions of dollars to them as though these people are
Right.
for sale. And
Right.
it's
Years later. Years
so
later.
deeply
Yep.
offensive that he
Yep.
believes that he can completely ignore a population of people until they have some value to him. And that's the only time that
Right.
they truly have any value. And it's something that we won't see in a Biden administration.
Right. If you care about dignity and you care about, the integrity of the office, certainly Donald Trump can't be cannot be your candidate for sure. So you're
No, he
watching
can't.
Vote for America. Oh,
Nope, you go right ahead. I'm stepping on you.
no,
Go right
we're
ahead.
jumping over each. It's okay. Well, we're just a little squiggly today with trying to fit everything in as we've got things are working behind the scenes and getting us on track here. You're watching Vote for America. We're going to be here every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. We're live at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time, and you can watch us live on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. And you can join the conversation because we want to hear from you. This election is so important to all of us. People have fears, they have concerns, and as we just heard from Rosario, they have passion about the issues and the people who are going to be affected by the outcome of this election. You can join that conversation by using the hashtag Vote for America across all the social media platform. Coming up next, we have another great guest for you. But in the meantime, here's what's new from the Lincoln Project.
If an opening comes in the last year of President Trump's term and the primary process is started, we'll wait to the next election. Hold the tape.
Lindsey Graham has told us who he is. Now it's time for South Carolina to tell him who we are. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising. Donald Trump says COVID-19
affects virtually nobody.
80% of COVID-19 deaths are over age 65.
It affects virtually nobody.
That's over 160,000 dead Americans over age 65.
It affects virtually nobody.
If you're over age 65, Donald Trump doesn't care if you die. Do you? The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So it takes longer to count those ballots, which is why we won't have them on election night or the morning after.
Precisely. And it takes days, not hours.
Right.
It takes days, sometimes weeks, depending on the size of the state and the counties processing them through 50, 60, 150 counties, depending on the state.
Right.
And so as each county reports its count, there will be a statewide aggregate, and then you will get a daily update on which candidates picked up which votes.
Right.
Now remember, the people voting by mail lean strongly Democrat.
Exactly.
And so the new counts that come in are going to start showing the Democratic candidate at the top of the ticket, in this case, Joe Biden, closing the gap of the votes total. And so he will get stronger every day of the count. This is just mathematical. It's just quantifiable based off of the demography of who is voting. It's nothing nefarious, but it creates a condition and an environment where people will start claiming the vote is being stolen because Trump is at his strongest point on the morning of November 4th, but by November 10th, the whole who's ahead could actually and most likely will flip in key battleground states that are close.
Hey, welcome back to Vote for America. We are going to introduce our final guest for the show today, and I'm so excited to be able to speak with Kat Calvin. She is the founder and executive director of an organization called Spread the Vote, which she started in 2016. And the goal of the organization, I'm going to let her tell us a lot more about it, but it's to make sure that no one is being disenfranchised, that we are giving everyone an opportunity to cast a ballot and have their voices heard. So, Kat, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so inspired by the work that you do. It's so incredibly important. The populations who you're working with are some of the folks who most need a voice in our elections, and very often don't have that. So please tell us more about what your organization does.
Sure. Well, thank you for those kind words. So at Spread the Vote, our primary objective is to help people get government-issued photo ID, primarily in voter ID states. So basically, DMV IDs. We've all been to the DMV. It's a nightmarish, terrible process. And for over 21 million eligible voters who don't have ID, the process of actually getting it is pretty difficult. We've got to you have to get documents like a birth certificate and proofs of identity. You have to pay for it. Our average cost is $40. You have to have transportation, all of these different things. And for folks who don't have ID, if you need to vote, you don't have an ID for a job or housing, medical care, ironically enough, COVID testing in a lot of places. And so it's really a challenge to get that ID. So we help folks get that. They use it for jobs, housing, all sorts of things. But then we also help our clients vote. So we register them to vote. 77% of our clients have never voted before. And so we do a lot of voter education, a lot of turnout help, a lot of transportation help, and really do everything we can to make sure that our clients are able to vote. And then this year, we're doing a lot of different campaigns and projects to help other folks be able to vote, whether they're incarcerated citizens who are eligible to vote, whether it's young people who are voting by mail for the first time and maybe aren't inclined to follow the directions, but really trying to address as many of the issues as we see that are specific to or exacerbated by 2020 to help as many people get to the polls as possible.
We've heard the president talk quite a lot about voter ID, and that it's just so simple to have voter identification. Everybody has a driver's license. What's the big deal? Just show an ID when you show up at the polls. And obviously, it's not that simple. So can you talk with us a little bit about what are some of the barriers that people face, why they wouldn't have photo ID?
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was easy because then I could just like be on vacation all the time. But the fact is, it's really hard. So one really big barrier, and one that we face constantly, is the amount of paperwork you have to take to the DMV. We've all searched frantically through our houses trying to find a birth certificate or an original marriage certificate or whatever it is. If you're a person experiencing homelessness, if you're a returning citizen, perhaps I'm an abuse survivor, one of the many groups of people for whom it's not as easy as just going to your office and searching through your filing cabinet to find a birth certificate or to find a proof of residency if you don't have a residence, and that's a really challenging thing. And so just gathering those documents can be incredibly difficult. We've gotten very good at calling departments of corrections and going through the multiple layers of bureaucracy that we have to go through to get things, or getting birth certificates from overseas or from, Puerto Rico right after Maria. So just that piece itself is really tough. The cost piece is also a challenge. IDs, for the most part in most states, are not free, even if you're indigent or homeless or a veteran. You have to pay for birth certificates. You have to sometimes pay for other documents. And if you don't have an ID and can't work, then, I work for a nonprofit. $40 is a lot of money to me. It's particularly a lot of money to folks who are experiencing homelessness or who are underemployed or unemployed. So there's just a lot of different factors that make the actual process of getting an ID in your hands really challenging.
And I would imagine this cycle is more challenging than 2016 was, even because now you have the additional layer of COVID-19. And so being able to have those face-to-face conversations with people, if you're trying to encourage them to get registered and get the ID that they're going to need, or even accessing Department of Motor Vehicles, it's all just become so much more complicated. So, what are some of the challenges that COVID has created for you, and how are you finding ways to overcome those?
Yeah, COVID really threw us for a loop this year. We had to very early on ground our volunteers, partially because DMVs were closing, and partially because we work with a very vulnerable population. And so in order to be sure that we were protecting them and being as safe as possible, we had to move to all virtual. There are a lot of challenges with that. One is that DMVs now are mostly appointment only. So we've got DMVs in some of our states and cities where we can't get an appointment until December, January, February, and every week it gets pushed further and further. We're all virtual, but only 1% of our clients have regular access to a phone. Much less than that have regular access to the internet. And the place where they usually get access to the internet is the public library, which is now closed. And so all of our work is done in person. We don't have offices because we are in the shelters, we're in the jails, we're in the schools. And now we can't do that. And so interacting with our clients has been a challenge. We actually developed as soon as we shut down, a bunch of really great sort of virtual pathways of doing work, changing and strengthening the way we work with our partners. And so we've actually been able to get IDs every single week since the shutdown, which we're really proud of. And we just shipped out 10,000 of the voter guides that we make to homeless shelters and jails and barbershops and food banks. And we're doing, COVID safe transportation. So we've had to shift everything around and really adapt and accept that some things are just going to find ways folks, get connected to services if we can't get them an ID until, December or January. And just really sort of flip everything around and think outside of the box.
Well, Kat, you are an absolute inspiration. You certainly put in perspective if folks you're working with are able to get out there and cast a ballot, the rest of us really have no excuse whatsoever to not make sure that we're taking part in our democracy. So congratulations on the work that you're doing, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, Jennifer, I'm completely inspired, blown away by her. It's such important work that she's doing.
Yeah, I was really struck by the conversation, Lisa, because voter ID is kind of a sensitive issue politically. When the partisanship that has become so deep in our country, that's an issue that's really been manipulated as a result of it. And from the Republican side, and I suspect that Democrats would say the same thing, we want every eligible voter to vote. And we believe that having to prove that you are an eligible voter is a good thing in our democracy. And just, but to listen to Kat, I think it's too easy for all Americans, Republicans or otherwise. It's too easy for us to forget or to not realize there are tens of millions of eligible voters who have challenges and struggles that they have to overcome to get there, where English isn't their first language, where they are new citizens to our country. To Kat's point, people who might be incarcerated but eligible to vote, or previously incarcerated but eligible to vote. All these challenges. So the issue isn't whether or not you are, whether or not you are eligible or not. It's whether or not you can prove it. And I love that that's the work that she's doing, getting those tools into the hands of people who want to participate in our democracy, who are legitimately qualified to participate in our democracy, but they need help getting all their ducks in a row so that they can.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful what she's doing. And as I said, it really means that the rest of us don't have an excuse not to be participating and getting out there to vote.
Right.
And there are folks who are going to have a difficult time being able to do that. So I think it's a responsibility that every one of us has. If we know of people who need some extra assistance in being able to either get to the polls, or they have confusion about how to not send in a naked ballot. We all need to be talking about these things and making sure that we're helping everybody's voices be heard.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that interview to us today, Lisa. That's a great organization. And thank you also for being with us yourself. It's always a pleasure to be on Vote for America with you. And a huge thank you to all of you who have tuned in today, watching live on YouTube, Facebook, and on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And I hope that you'll continue to engage in this conversation with us using the hashtag Vote for America. This is so important. Whether we're talking about making sure that every eligible American citizen who has the right to vote gets that opportunity, or we're talking about so many of these disenfranchised communities that have been under assault by this president, to Rosario Marin's point, people in our country, American citizens who love and care about our country just as much as we do, who get targeted by this president on a daily basis in the most undignified way. This is our moment. This is our opportunity. We all want the same thing. We all want that American dream. We all want the opportunity and the freedom and the equality that comes with being an American citizen. And this president is truly on a path to try to destroy that for future generations. This is our moment. So we're so happy that you are here with us today. We hope that you will continue to spread the word, that you will come back and join us again. And most importantly of all, if there's anything we've learned today that's important, make sure your absentee ballot is properly dressed. No naked ballots can go out if you want your vote to be counted. Thank you for being with us at Vote for America. I look forward to seeing you next time.